Welcome to the Divorce and Real Estate Podcast, where we navigate the complex intersection of divorce and property.
Our mission is to provide crucial insights, expert advice, and empathetic support for those facing divorce and real estate decisions.
Each episode will provide you insight into the specific challenges and opportunities available
for your real estate during the divorce process,
along with expert advice from leading professionals in the field. Thanks for joining us. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Divorce and Real Estate Podcast. I'm Kristen Carmichael, one of your co-hosts. I am a family attorney, mediator, and certified divorce financial analyst. And you are joining us in January when we're recording this episode, which is National Divorce Month. So for this month, we are bringing you a special guest to understand the title aspect of real estate, specifically during a divorce. So I'm going to pass it off to my co-host, the wonderful Asher Cohen, to give us some more information on who we're talking to today.
All right, thanks, Kristen. And hey, everyone, Asher Cohen here, founder of Baez RE at Realty One Group, your real estate advisor of the podcast. So we had a lender on in the past. Kristen and I have gone over so many different facets of, the real estate transaction while going through a divorce. One other really important person involved in your real estate transaction is your escrow officer. So today, I am so excited to introduce you to Cherie Martinez with Chicago Title. We've worked with her for many years on different types of transactions, and mostly she knows how to deal with people that might be in an emotional charged situation, if you will call it. So, Cherie, thank you so much for being on today.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me.
How long have you been in the escrow title world?
In May of this year, it'll be 29 years.
Wow. Okay. So you've definitely experienced all the different types
All of
of
it.
people and transactions and everything.
Absolutely.
So since you have so much experience in the real estate transaction, world, I kind of want you to put like your hat on of all of the people you've helped when it comes to them, going through their transaction, but also going through their divorce as well.
Mhm.
And if there was anything like right off the top that you would recommend or kind of remember that you're able to share with us, is there anything that would help anyone going through both of those things at the same time? Any tips or tricks?
Absolutely. Well, I think ideally at first, I know all the transactions I've had, sometimes people, because of the emotional state they're currently in because of divorce, it's very, very hard. They're selling a home, perhaps their dream home. Um, Sometimes they're not quite forthcoming with that information that they're getting divorced or etc. Always, I suggest that if you're selling your home, speak to your real estate professional, your real estate agent, your attorney, whoever it may be, to just to communicate that with the escrow officer or any other title company, so we know how to address it, and in a kind manner and a patient manner.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's true. Like some people don't want to bring that part of it up. And
Exactly. Sometimes I'm not aware of it until we're deep into the escrow. And it's just always to have that information up front so we know how to address it.
yeah. So it sounds like you've been in a transaction before where things are moving along and the entire time you don't even know that they're going through a divorce.
Exactly.
So you're really relying on, the real estate agent or
Mm-hmm.
or the actual sellers to say, "Hey, this is what's going on
Right.
and we need you to know about it." So that's one right off the top. I love that.
Exactly.
And then when it comes to the money, right? Like when money gets involved, everyone wants their share and they want to
Exactly.
make sure that it's protected. So like what's one thing that they can do with you to make sure like they know at the end of the transaction they're going to be okay and getting their money?
Sure. I know initially past situations I've had in terms of there's been disputes about the splitting of proceeds, etc. There hasn't really been any kind of upfront conversations between the parties getting divorced on who's receiving what. There's a divorce decree. However, that divorce decree is very complicated. It has very many details about who gets what, et cetera, et cetera. And unfortunately, that's not something we're able to interpret. So essentially, if there's, we need to know pretty much up front proceeds are going to be split 50-50. Proceeds are going to be split 25-75, whatever it may be. And with that instruction, because we need a mutual instruction from both sellers on how they want those monies dispersed.
So have you been in a situation where it wasn't clear in the decree?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, like I said, because sometimes the divorce decree has, wife to pay 75% of the electricity bill, husband to pay this, etc. It gets very, very convoluted and confusing.
Mm.
And so they look to us to interpret that. There's no way in the scope of a real estate escrow to do that back and forth, because you're essentially dealing with one amount being split between two parties. We're not going to determine what you have to pay. We only know what percentage. The only instruction that we need is who's going to be receiving what percentage.
Now,
And that has to be a mutual instruction.
so is it always a percentage or could it be a dollar amount?
It could be a dollar amount.
Okay. But it has to be clear. So, Kristen, back to you on this. If this is such a common issue, which I never knew, what are ways that you help with that? Because obviously it's coming from you. You're the source of this decree.
Yeah. So I think one big misconception, like in the legal field and just generally, is that title can handle all of those disbursements. So like a great example is we're going to pay off the mortgage, we're going to pay the closing costs, we're going to pay off this credit card, and then we're going to split it 50-50. But the title company can't pay off that credit card. So one, from a professional standpoint, it's letting our clients know you can have that agreement in place in terms of we can really structure what you're going to pay off from your payout from title, but title can't do it for you. And really establishing that in the paperwork so that everybody knows that's not something that can be paid off. Really, the only circumstances that we see title pay off certain debts is like if a refinance, for example, is contingent on your car payment being paid off or something in that way, but not a divorce decree division. The other thing too is we just want to make sure that it's very, very clear who's getting what percentage and make it as clear as possible. As Sheree said, we want to make sure that when it gets to title, they know exactly what that is. So it's really key to reach those agreements, one, prior to the divorce prior to separating and selling the house. Because we get a lot of couples that are like, well, we haven't gone through the divorce, we haven't reached those agreements, but then they're trying to reach them with title. Like that is not title's responsibility to do that. And then two, making sure that the documents are drafted properly with those agreements summarized in there so that they can easily just say, this is how it's being divided. Because if they're disputing it, a lot of times what happens is one of their attorneys has to open a trust account. They have to drop all the money in the trust account, and then neither of them have access to it while they dispute how it's going to be divided. So it's just really important that it's very clear what the amount or percentage is, and that also people understand title cannot pay out any other debts or expenses that you may have agreed to pay out of the house proceeds, which is completely okay, but you have to initiate those things, not title.
That brings up another point. So what people need to understand is they can't agree with you as the divorce attorney mediator, then think they can renegotiate the terms of things with the escrow officer. What was created in that plan, that divorce decree, is what the escrow officer is following. So, Cherie, you always taught me that we're not creating any ways of how things are supposed to go. We're just taking instruction and then fulfilling those needs.
Exactly. My role is a neutral third party and essentially an instruction taker. I'm not going to negotiate the contract, nor do you want me to, or negotiate the divorce, but you're going to give me instruction, and then I'm going to execute that instruction. And especially in terms of, like I've already said, in terms of any kind of seller's proceeds, we need that mutual instruction. So that's why there has to be conversations between a married couple prior to actually going into escrow, how that's going to be done.
Now, a lot of what we're talking about right now is when a married couple that's going through a divorce is selling a property.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also sometimes the occasion where someone's going through a divorce and one of the parties is wanting to purchase a property.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in Arizona, that's a little bit of an issue because of the kind of state that we are, of a community property state.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
let's say someone is looking to buy a property,
Hmm.
going through a divorce, they have a divorce decree. How does the person ensure that the other person that they're getting divorced from not try to participate in ownership of this new property?
Right. Well, because Arizona is a community property state, if there's a party, if you're technically still married and you're buying a property, the non-buying spouse has to execute a deed called a disclaimer deed that basically states that this party has no interest in the subject property. This deed is executed and signed by one of our notaries or by myself the to ensure the notary is correct. And that's actually also required by us in order to issue title. And if you're getting a loan, the new lender is going to require that as well.
Okay, so question for Kristen then
Mm-hmm.
is if let's say one of the people don't want to sign that disclaimer deed, is that something that would be in the decree that they must sign it?
So it's interesting because you don't need a disclaimer deed after the divorce is final. So if the divorce is final and you're buying new property, you're not married. So the other person wouldn't have any interest. This is really an issue where people either, before they even start their legal process, they are separating. A lot of my clients will come to me and they're like, well, we were trying to get prepared. So they sold their house and then they each bought their own individual houses, but they were still married. So they would have had to do disclaimer deeds for each other before we can even have conversations about these homes. And then from a legal perspective, we would need to draft out that they waive any and all interest in each other's property that they've already purchased. The bigger issue comes like mid-divorce where they're selling the house and one person's now found their dream house and they're trying to buy it in the middle of the divorce. They're still married, but the divorce isn't finalized, then a disclaimer deed's needed. And so, yes, we can say that they need to sign a disclaimer deed, but there's nothing legally binding them to do it because the legally binding document is the divorce decree that's going to finalize the divorce. So we do hear a lot, especially from those in escrow and title, of they're trying to contact the other person to get them to sign the disclaimer deed. And they're like, well, I'll sign the disclaimer deed if they give me the car. And again, that's not what title or escrow should be having to deal with. They should just be getting the signature.
Mm-hmm.
So it does definitely make it an issue, particularly if they're trying to do their divorce themselves and they're not working with an attorney or a mediator that can then help handle that situation. So I've had title or escrow agents reach out to me and say, we need this signed. This is where the barrier is. Then I can step in, have a meeting with the clients and say, okay, so why are we stuck here? What can we do to get this signed and move that forward? But if people are doing it on their own, or they're not making their professionals, like their legal professionals, aware of this issue, then they're kind of trying to put escrow and title in the middle to be the mediator, and that's just not their role.
Yeah. Cherie, what's the difference? Because a lot of people say escrow and title and
Mm-hmm.
in the same sentence,
Mm-hmm.
like they're the same thing or they mismatch. Like, what's the difference between escrow and title?
Sure. In Arizona, we are all title escrow companies. There's twofold. So the title part of it is when we issue a title policy to the buyer, or if you're refinancing to the lender, or if you're buying a new home to the lender, that there's clear title. So there's the issuance of title insurance. In order to issue title insurance, we have to ensure there's clear title. We have to ensure that mortgage are paid, HOA demands are paid, etc. The escrow part is the money part. Escrow technically means the holding of money. So my role as the escrow agent is to deposit. Funds are deposited with me. Funds are remitted by me. I prepare the settlement statement to ascertain who gets paid pursuant to the lender documents and the purchase contract. So that's that part of it. So the escrow is like the money part, the disbursement of the monies, and the title part is the actual issuance of deeds, conveying property from one party to the other, and title insurance.
Awesome. So hopefully everyone appreciates that because I think a lot of people, even myself, back in the day, I would say escrow title as if it's the same thing.
Absolutely.
So going back to the disclaimer deed conversation,
Mm-hmm.
have you ever been in a transaction or dealing with a transaction where one of the parties was not going to sign that? And what happened and what advice can you give? And I guess, what happens in your role in that
Sure.
situation?
I've had a couple scenarios in which there's been reluctance to sign. I want to put that politely. I've maybe had one transaction that just did not go because in order to proceed, we need that disclaimer deed. And if the party's really going to dig in and say, I'm not doing it, there's no transaction. Majority of the time, it is signed. Sometimes at the very end, people try to use it as a negotiation tool or just to, it's like I said, it's a very emotionally charged situation. So very, very often it's signed at the last minute. And and when I make that initial call, I always ask the other party, do they understand I'm going to be calling them? Because that's the last thing. I don't want to put people in a position where they don't know who I am, and I'm asking them to sign away essentially rights to a property. I want an explanation. I want them to be prepared for that call, and we will make that easy as possible. If they're out of state or with they don't want to come to my office, just to make it an easy process, we'll schedule a notary to meet them at their home or work, just so that part's done. Sometimes that's a little. I think that's an advantage sometimes, and it helps people sign that document just to make it easy for them.
Okay. So here's a scenario that I want to pass by you,
Uh-huh.
and let me know if what the best solution would be with this. So let's say, two people are getting divorced. They have their divorce decree. One person just doesn't want to be a part of the transaction. They don't want to sign things. They just don't. They're too emotionally charged with this entire situation. They're fine with the property selling. They're cool with
Right.
that. And they know the amount they're getting per the decree. So, what's an easy solution for getting that home on the market and getting it sold if that person just doesn't want to be a part of signing stuff?
Right. Ultimately, they're going to have to sign something. But you can, especially if you have a conversation, it really kind of starts with you're a real estate agent, the realtor, the real estate professional. So they can, obviously, there's a relationship there, there's trust there, so they can explain the process and gently explain this is not going to happen unless it's done. And so, but again, and in terms of like people telling me they're getting divorced that way, I know how to approach it. I can approach it, however people want me to do so. If you just want me to send text, I'll do so. So, people, like you said, people want to be removed from the process because it's just too painful. Ultimately, if they need 15 minutes to sign documents, that's fine. So I take that instruction from the real estate agent, typically say, hey, this person's in a bad place. Can you just send them emails or whatever it may be? And like I said, there's always that option. They don't have to come to my office. I can have someone meet them and 15, 20 minutes of their time, the documents are signed, and then they can move on.
Is there a way for the to be removed from the deed and the other person just handles the transaction part?
You could do that. For example, I mean, they could do that prior to.
Okay.
You would have to write a contract. So let's say there's two parties currently on title. Only one party wants to sell it. So you write a contract with only one party as the seller, and then we can have a deed recorded prior to close of escrow. But you want to make sure that's disclosed to the buyer and the lender because it's going to be, when they see the chain of title, it's going to show that. So you don't, it's not something you want to disclose up front, but something we can do.
Yeah. There's been a lot of conversation with Kristen and I where we don't want to necessarily disclose to a buyer or buyer's agent
Uh-huh.
that the people selling it are going through a divorce because sometimes people take advantage of that situation.
True.
So if you know that there's a divorce going on, do you as the escrow officer have to disclose that to the buyer side of the transaction?
I do not.
Okay. So it could just be, all on one side, the other party doesn't have to really know what's happening.
Correct.
Okay. Because that's sometimes, again, even when you start a transaction, if the buyer side finds out about that before their
Mm-hmm.
inspection period, then they start renegotiating the deal. They know that they just need to sell it and they try to take advantage of the situation.
Right, right. No, again, because of my role as that neutral third party, I'm not going to share information with someone it's not material to my transaction. You
Yeah.
know, even if people are out of state, etc., I'll just say I won't even I probably won't even disclose that typically because it's not no one's business really. There's buyers or sellers, etc., but I'm not going to disclose any information about about the divorce.
Yeah. I'm sure people try to get that information
Sure,
from
they do.
you.
I
They
feign ignorance.
they try.
What?
They try. Okay, so I guess what information do you need from a divorcing couple like to ensure a smooth transaction? You mentioned just letting you know,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like becoming aware of it.
Right.
You mentioned a clear divorce decree, right? Not just a
Mhm.
divorce decree, but something that Kristen would probably send,
Right.
right? Or provide.
And technically, I don't even need a copy of the divorce decree because we're not going to interpret that in terms of who gets paid for what. Um, Typically, what I do when I do know it's a divorce, I will try to finalize my settlement statement as soon as I can. And that way I have an amount of the proceeds. And then I give it to, both sellers and they can then give me instruction how those proceeds are split.
Yeah. Kristen, what do you think about all this when you're from your perspective, right? You're kind of sometimes out of it already, right? Like
Yeah.
at this point in the whole thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've kind of talked about in past episodes, it really depends on the legal professional that you're working with. In our office, we take it as more as we've talked about, like the divorce concierge approach. So we're really there from beginning to end. So we're there if title needs to call us, if the realtor needs to call us, like if we need to walk them through what's written or get the parties on the same page. I mean, I know Asher, you and I have had cases where technically I'm done. Like the case is done. It's signed, it's filed. My role is no longer there. But you've reached out and just said, okay, we're stuck on this, or somebody's saying they're no longer agreeing to that. And sometimes they just need a reminder from me, like, this is a legally binding agreement. Like, you need to be following through on that. You need to be doing that. But I appreciate kind of the references to you could have a notary come to your house, you could sign separately. Like the stuff
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be experienced together. We really do that in our office too. If it's important for the clients to come in person and sign together, they can. But
Mm-hmm.
most of our signings are going to happen virtually, they're going to happen separate because most people don't want to experience that moment together. And
Yeah.
honestly, like it's already tense enough of a
Mm-hmm.
situation. Do you really want to be sitting in the same room doing all of that? So it is one of those things where typically at that point we're out of it. We see more and more conflict when our clients try to buy homes in the middle of the process, because
Mm-hmm.
that just makes it really challenging for everybody in the real estate end, because whether it's the realtor, title, lender, they're needing certain documentation. And like, if we are not made aware, now we're in this middle zone where we have to have a disclaimer deed where they potentially don't have an agreement on how the house is going to be divided in writing. Or potentially the one person is using a bunch of marital funds to buy this new house. And the other person's like, well, I'm not going to sign off on that when a bunch of that money is mine. So it definitely makes it more complicated if it's in the middle of the process than it is after. But you do have people that sell their house a year after their divorce is final and they have just as much conflict as they were going through the divorce. So it's one of those things where, as we've talked about, the emotions ebb and flow with
Mm-hmm.
a divorce process before, during, and after. So it does impact this aspect of your real estate transaction.
Yeah. Cherie, what does it look like when one party is just buying out the other party while they're going through a divorce? Does it look any different than a typical
Yes,
transaction?
and that gets a little complicated. Are you talking about, for example, like in a refinance situation, like
Yeah.
someone would refinance a home?
Hmm.
And this is our position with Chicago Title and our parent company, Fidelity National Financial, because essentially when that happens, our underwriting policy is we can certainly facilitate those kind of closings. But because it's pursuant to like a divorce decree, if it's within a refinance structure, we can't prepare the deed. Is that we actually state that it has to be done by an attorney.
Mhm.
So it gets a little, and people don't like hearing that, and it gets a little emotional. But
Sure.
that's our underwriting policy, probably because of, my guess is probably claims in the past, etc. So the cleanest way to do that, because it's not a refinance really, and it's not really a resale transaction. So the way to kind of address that and proceed is to have an attorney prepare the warranty deed.
And that's
That's
And then,
actually
interesting.
really common.
that's
Yeah,
good to know.
it's not just your company. It's super.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know
You
at
know,
least on my end to kind of add to that, like assumptions of mortgages as well, or refinances. At least a lot of lenders, when it comes to assumptions, what they're doing is they're giving a qualification packet, like to qualify for the assumption, for example. And one of their required documents is a deed. So not signed, but just the deed drafted.
mm-hmm.
And so then they submit it with the qualification packet. Then once they qualified, then the deed can be signed at that time. And then ultimately escrow can go through for the transfer of money and things. But it does piecemeal that process a bit more than it would for like your traditional sale or purchase process.
Mm-hmm.
And for that deed to be created, Kristen, is that something that you can assist with or point in a direction to get it done?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we don't do deeds in office. Most deeds are going to be handled by estate planning attorneys, so estate and trust attorneys. Also paralegals. So we give both
Mm-hmm.
options to our clients. We have a paralegal who has been handling deeds and deed issues for over 20 years and does it at a very low cost. And then we have clients that choose to use their estate planning attorney. So we really give them both options of what they prefer. I mean, sure, I think you would probably agree with this. Just don't go online and get the, standard deed and try and fill it out yourself.
Absolutely. That causes
I've
problems with title.
had so many clients bring a deed to our office and say, I filled it out myself. And like, because we're acting as a neutral in a lot of cases, we legally can't say if it's right or not. So instead, I just kind of have to be like, I strongly recommend that you have someone else redraft it.
Yeah.
Like,
And
people
when
just
we've
think it's going to be really easy and plug and play, and it's not.
right. And when we've had situations where people have executed those kind of deeds, stuff online, etc., we will not issue title insurance until those deeds are re-signed and prepared by either an escrow agent or an attorney. So then you still have to do a corrective deed. So it's just better to have it done correctly the first time.
Nice. Okay, so we kind of went over the basics of just inform you of what you need to know that a divorce is going on, whether it's a buy side, a listing side sell transaction, making sure that the parties are clear on what the expectations are on the outcome. So if they're supposed to get a certain dollar amount, a percentage amount, if someone's buying something, they're understanding that they're going to be signing a disclaimer deed that they have no rights to any of that property that's the other party is purchasing. Just again, clear expectations up front. Cherie, is there anything else when it comes to like the divorce and real estate side of things on the escrow side, title side, that we need to know about when going through a divorce?
I think we've covered the majority. It's really about communication and excuse me, just excuse me. The more communication, the more instruction we have, we'll be able to proceed and make it a smoother transaction. So it's having all those hard conversations up front before you actually get into the escrow process. And that way our process will be smoothly and will run smoother and better for the parties in the escrow.
Okay. Kristen, anything on your end?
So one thing that I would bring up is if I understand correctly, Sheree, like you can have the disclaimer deed signed and you can generally say what it means, but you can't really provide advice around signing of what type of deed and what it means.
Correct. I will tell people when people do ask about the disclaimer deed, which they do, I
Yeah.
just give them the one sentence answer. This is a deed disclaiming your interest in the subject property.
Right.
And
Just
whatever
like
that
you
may
would for
entail, if
any
they
other,
have
like
further
if it's
questions.
tenants in common or
Right.
survivor benefit. Yeah. So I would say it's super disclaimer deeds have a massive impact on family cases and divorce cases. So just kind of throwing in there because we're talking about title. During a divorce, not really as concerned about it. Like you're buying a brand new house, you're in the middle of a divorce, you need a disclaimer deed signed. You're not really going to own stuff together. But just from a perspective of thinking earlier in the marriage, especially with family law, if let's say that you were married, happily married, you're not going to get a divorce in your mind. And then you can't qualify for the loan or you're somehow negatively impacting the loan, so you sign a disclaimer deed. I would just say for those that are watching the podcast, it's really important to get legal advice before you sign that because, again, Cherie can give you as much information as she can, which is exactly what it is. It's disclaiming your interest in the property. But what most people don't realize is what impact that could have 10 years from now when if you get a divorce, how that's impacting your community marital interest in that home. So it's less of an issue as like, yes, it can be used as a tool to help you buy a house during a divorce process, but more as a make sure that you're really understanding the different titles and processes behind those and what they mean for long-term impact before you sign them, even when you're married generally.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing disclaimer deeds when we're not dealing with a divorce situation.
Mm-hmm.
And like you mentioned, Kristen, some people might be negatively impacting the mortgage, so they can't be on there, whatever it might be. Or there's people that just, that's their agenda. They don't want their spouse to be on it for whatever reason, and not all spouses know what they're signing. And it's important that people are aware of what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
and what their rights are, or what they're removing their rights to be for that property.
Yeah, and it's
So,
also important to know that, I think that there's a misconception of like what information each person can provide. And so like an escrow agent and a notary, like they cannot explain to you the legal implication of your documents. So, it might feel like an inconvenience to do a consult with an attorney or get some information there. But again, like they cannot provide you with that because they don't have the legal ability to do so. So just knowing like serves such an important purpose, but that purpose is not to provide you legal advice. And so I think for all of us, I mean, people are constantly asking advice that maybe we cannot provide the answer for. So just being cognizant of when you go to sign legal documents, even if they're in escrow or title, those also have legal implications that can't be discussed in depth while you're signing them. So
Mm-hmm.
just consider getting that information before you sign.
Cherie, thank you so much for being on.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And hopefully, a lot of people are now a little bit more aware of just kind of this side of the transaction. And again, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Happy to help.
We loved having you, and I learned something, title versus escrow. That was my new lesson of the day.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it.
Right. Lesson of the day.
There we
Well, per
go.
usual, everyone, thank you so much for joining us for the podcast. Feel free to add any comments below if you would like certain topics in the future for us to talk about, and we will look forward to seeing you on another episode of the Divorce and Real Estate Podcast. Have a wonderful day.
See ya.